The tea had already gone cold, but Arham didn't notice because in that quiet roadside cafe, under the pale gold light of a Karachi afternoon, 4 identical little girls were staring at him like he was their last hope in the world, and then one of them leaned forward, her tiny fingers trembling as they gripped the edge of his table, and whispered something that made his heart stop. "Please, pretend you're our father." For a moment, the world didn't move. The clatter of cups, the distant honking of traffic, the hum of life outside, it all faded into silence. Arham blinked slowly, unsure if he had even heard correctly. He was just a man trying to get through another lonely day, sipping tea he couldn't afford to waste, carrying a grief he never spoke about. But those 4 girls, their eyes weren't playing games, they were afraid. Before we go any further, if you believe that even strangers can become miracles in someone's life, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Spread Love Daily. Because sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can rewrite someone's entire destiny. Arham had not always been a quiet, broken man. Once, he had been full of laughter, of dreams, of plans that stretched far beyond the dusty streets he now walked alone. But life had a way of unraveling things. A tragic accident had taken his wife and little son in one cruel moment, leaving behind an emptiness that no time could fill. Since then, Arham lived simply, repairing old electronics in a tiny rented room, eating modest meals, and speaking only when necessary. Tea had become his only companion. That afternoon was supposed to be no different. He had chosen the same corner table, ordered the cheapest cup, and sat staring into nothingness. Until those girls appeared. They were dressed in neat pastel frocks, their hair tied in identical braids, their shoes polished to perfection. They didn't belong in a place like this. Everything about them spoke of wealth, of privilege. Yet their faces told a different story, one of fear, confusion, and quiet desperation. Arham hesitated, unsure how to respond. He wasn't good with people anymore, let alone children. But something in their eyes broke through the walls he had built around himself. He leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle but cautious. "What do you mean?" The girls exchanged glances, as if silently deciding who would speak. Finally, the smallest one stepped forward again, her voice barely audible. "Our mother said we have to stay here, but those men keep watching us. They think we're alone." Arham's chest tightened. He glanced around subtly, and that's when he saw them, 2 men sitting across the street, pretending to scroll on their phones but clearly keeping an eye on the girls. A cold chill ran down his spine. "Where's your mother?" he asked. "She said she'll come back," another girl whispered. "But it's been a long time." Something wasn't right, and in that moment, Arham realized this wasn't just about pretending. These girls were in danger. He took a slow breath, his mind racing. He was no hero. No powerful man. Just someone barely surviving his own life. But those 4 little faces, they reminded him of something he had lost. Or maybe, something he still had left to give. Without another word, he stood up, pulled out a chair, and gestured for them to sit. "From now on," he said quietly, "you stay close to me." The girls didn't hesitate. They rushed to his side as if they had known him forever, clinging to him with a trust that both terrified and humbled him. The cafe owner glanced curiously but said nothing. Arham placed his hand protectively on the table, shielding the girls from view. He could feel the weight of the men's stares growing heavier. Minutes passed like hours. Then suddenly, one of the girls whispered, "They're coming." Arham's pulse quickened. He looked up and saw the 2 men approaching, their expressions now unmistakably predatory. "Think, Arham. Think." He straightened his posture, forcing a calmness he didn't feel. As the men reached the table, one of them smirked. "Are these your daughters?" he asked casually. Arham didn't flinch. "Yes," he replied firmly. The man's smile faltered just slightly. "We thought they were alone." Arham met his gaze without blinking. "They're not." There was a long, tense silence. Then, as if calculating the risk, the men exchanged a glance. Something about Arham's quiet confidence must have unsettled them. Without another word, they turned and walked away. Only then did Arham realize he had been holding his breath. The girls clutched his arms tighter, their fear slowly melting into relief. "You saved us," one of them whispered. Arham shook his head gently. "No. We just got lucky." But deep down, he knew it was more than luck. It was a moment that would change everything. Nearly 20 minutes later, a sleek black car screeched to a halt outside the cafe. A woman stepped out, her face pale with panic, her eyes scanning frantically until they landed on the table, and then she ran. Her heels clicked rapidly against the pavement as she rushed inside, pulling the girls into a tight embrace. The moment she reached them, tears streamed down her face as she held them, whispering apologies over and over again. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Arham stepped back, giving them space. But the woman looked up at him, her eyes filled with both gratitude and something deeper, recognition. She said softly. You stayed with them. He nodded. They asked me to. She studied him carefully, as if trying to understand the kind of men who would do such a thing without hesitation. My name is Zareen Kadam, she said finally. And you have no idea what you just did. Arham didn't respond. He wasn't interested in praise. He just wanted to return to his quiet life, but life rarely asks for permission before changing direction. Over the next few days, something unexpected happened. Zareen found him, not once, but again and again. At first, it was to thank him properly. Then to check on him. Then, just to talk. She was a powerful CEO, the head of a rapidly growing company, a woman used to control and authority. But behind that strength was a mother carrying an unbearable burden. Raising quadruplets alone had never been easy. And after recent threats tied to her business dealings, fear had become a constant shadow in her life. You were calm, she told him one evening. Even when you were scared. Arham gave a faint smile. I've been scared for a long time. You learned to hide it. The girls had grown attached to him almost instantly. They would light up whenever they saw him, running toward him with laughter that echoed through spaces that had once felt empty. For the first time in years, Arham felt something stir inside his chest, not pain, not grief, something warmer, but with it came conflict. He didn't belong in their world. He knew that. A man with no status, no wealth, no future. Just a past filled with loss. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold, Zareen said something that changed everything. They trust you more than anyone, she said quietly. And I trust you too. Arham looked away. That's dangerous. Maybe, she admitted. But sometimes, trust is the only thing that keeps us human. Days turned into weeks. The girls began calling him Baba without even realizing it. At first, Arham would gently correct them. But over time, he stopped because somewhere along the way, he had stopped pretending. He had become what they needed, and what he needed, too. But life wasn't done testing him. The threats returned, stronger, more dangerous. Zareen's world grew darker, her enemies more aggressive. And suddenly, Arham found himself standing at a crossroads. Walk away and protect himself, or stay, and risk everything. The night everything changed, the girls were asleep. The house was silent, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Zareen stood by the window, her voice barely a whisper. They're not going to stop. Arham stepped beside her, his expression steady. Then we won't let them win. She turned to him, her eyes searching. Why are you doing this? She asked. You could leave. You don't owe us anything. Arham looked toward the hallway where the girls slept. I know what it's like to lose a family, he said softly. I won't let it happen again. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not just gratitude, not just trust, something deeper, something real. And for the first time in years, Arham wasn't alone anymore. As the story comes to a close, take a moment to reflect. If this journey touched your heart even a little, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Your support helps stories like these reach more people who need hope. And before we end, tell us in the comments, do you believe strangers can become family when it matters most? Because sometimes, the people who walk into your life unexpectedly are the ones who stay forever.